It's been a week of strange sounds on farming today. And
it's cracks, 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 cracks.
The reason? Well, we've been following the fortunes of farmland birds, species which are dependent on farmed habitats for their survival. And some of them do have particularly interesting calls, especially that second one. Do stick around to hear what made it. So, from corn buntings to lapwings, there's been a drastic drop in farmland bird populations since the 1970s. Alice Groom, head of sustainable land policy at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, told Charlotte Smith why many farmland bird species have seen their populations decline so dramatically.
Back in the 60s and 70s, farming policy paid for farmers to remove a lot of the habitats, so the flower-rich meadows, hedgerows, areas of scrub, and even farm ponds. We also had changes in farming practices, so increased use of insecticides and pesticides, but also things like changing from spring sown to autumn sown cropping meant that there weren't these weedy overwinter stubbles, which were a great source of food for farmland birds.
Over the past number of years, though, we have had many different environmental schemes which pay farmers to create habitat for birds and mammals. What kind of an impact are they having?
We have had this great history of agri-environment schemes, particularly in England, that has enabled more habitat to be brought back onto farmland. And there are many farmers who have engaged really positively with those schemes. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing the rate of decline slowing. But we know that it's still not enough. So really up-to-date evidence shows that we need about 50 to 60% of farmers to manage 10% under a mix of wildlife habitat. And if we were able to do that, the research says we could be 90% confident that would lead to a reverse in farmland birds.
You must be concerned then that the sustainable farming incentive is currently closed to applications and that we've spoken to farmers on this programme who can't renew some of the schemes that pay them to do this, the countryside stewardship schemes.
It's vital that government gets this new version of the sustainable farming incentive out. And we think that they have this opportunity now with a new version to introduce a wildlife package that enables farmers to get proper reward for doing that sort of 10% wildlife habitat for nature.
That's Alice Groom from the RSPB. Intensive farming is often cited as the reason for declining numbers of birds in the countryside, but it isn't always the case. Sometimes it can be land abandonment or a lack of activity on the land that can affect species. The small brown corncrake used to be common in mainland Britain. It's now mainly restricted to the western edges of Scotland and Ireland. Crofters and conservation agencies are working together there to provide the best habitat and encourage breeding, as Nancy Nicholson reports from the Western Isles.
I'm wading around in damp grass on a beautiful morning on the Isle of Lewis, and this land is generally agreed to be ideal corncrake territory, but there's no sign of any of them today. And that's not really a surprise because they're elusive, secretive birds, and you only really know they're around because of their distinctive call. And I'm with two people who know better than most what that sounds like. The RSPB's Community Officer, Shona McClellan, and Crofter Marjorie McLean. Can you give me an impression, Shona, of the sound that we'd all like to be hearing right now?
Well, I'll try. It's cracks, 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 cracks.
And Marjo, would you agree? Is that right, or have you a better impression?
No, that sounds about it. Yeah, you hear that in the early evenings in the quiet. You hear that the males calling.
And do you remember? You're not old, but do you remember when there were more corncrakes, or is that more historical?
Yes, absolutely. I used to curse them when you'd be, couldn't get to sleep at night and all that because there were so many calling outside the window. But
How long ago was that?
That would have been back in the 70s and 80s. And they were, well, not thick on the ground, but certainly plenty of them. And the competing sounds with the birds was annoying, to say the least. But be quite happy to take that back now.
So, Shona, we understand, of course, that very intensive agriculture can be a problem for many farmland birds. But it's hardly intensive here, is it? So what's the problem?
What we're finding is that, you know, there's small pockets that are really good for corncrakes, and then there's other areas that maybe gone out of use. So even like the field across from here is that's what I would call rank grass, because it's just too thick. What that needs is grazing. There's been 2 projects on the go at the same time. There's been one where there's been land management agreements, 5-year ones, that have been agreed with local crofters. Murdo is one of those. And then we've got other crofters within the local area, about up to 50, who are in the Corncrake initiative.
What sort of measures have you been taking then, Murdo?
We follow the guidelines that the RSP have given us. We used to cut back on some of the vegetation. We're encouraging it to grow, so nettles and other things like that, which are ideal for the corncrake. Doing their best to provide loose cover, because if it's not loose enough for them to walk into and hide in, it's not very attractive to them. So,
Oh, is that geese coming now? They're very loud, aren't they? Right overhead, coming in. And so, as for you as a crofter then, is this good territory as well? There's a lot of grass here. Is that for your sheep?
That's it. We let the sheep in, so there's no competition between them. So we let the sheep in at a certain time of year, so that it's ideal for them coming in the spring. At this time of year, yeah, we can have the sheep in, but then later on we'll allow it to grow a bit more.
And do you get any support, any incentive to work with the RSPB?
There's a small payment, but it's not a huge amount, but it's more that's actually getting the nature back, getting the birds back to where it used to be. We planted yellow iris from about where we're standing down to the stream that's down the end there, and that grows quite tall, grows quite quickly at the right time of year and provides cover for the birds. So the corncrake like that, and you'll see there's some of them are still sprouting, but when we did plant that, the geese were pulling them out almost as fast as we were putting them in. So not all the birds are welcome. Yeah, but the corncrake certainly likes it. The geese, they can stay as far away as possible.
That's crofter Murdo McLean. A summertime visitor to the UK from Africa, the Nightjar is known for its distinctive churring call and reptilian eyes. It's also very hard to spot, thanks to its camouflaged feathers and because it only comes out at night. The species has struggled in many areas of the country as its habitat has been affected by farming and forestry. But in Staffordshire, efforts have been made to ensure that the right conditions are in place for the Nightjar to thrive, and these seem to be paying off. Our reporter Bob Hockenhole met with Ben Dolan from the West Midlands bird ringing group, hoping to catch a glimpse of these elusive birds.
The churr of the nightjar, a secretive bird much harder to see than to hear. But Cannock Chase in Staffordshire is a stronghold for the species. Early in the evening, Ben Dolan from the West Midlands bird ringing group is putting up a net to catch the elusive birds.
What I'm doing at the moment is I'm just getting 2 poles and staking them into the ground, and then what I'll do is I'll put the net onto the poles, spread it out, and we've got a 30-foot net with us today. That's special for catching nightjars, so it's got deep pockets.
And you're doing it because you want to ring them. Why are you doing that?
So what we aim to understand is the population of them, really. Do they come back? How many are there? How successful has their breeding been for this year? And kind of their longevity as well. How old do they get to? By doing this work, you can protect the habitat. Because if there's a decline, we have to understand why. And a lot of the time we can pinpoint actually, well, why is this happening? And if we don't monitor them, we'll lose them.
The British Trust for Ornithology says nightjars were once much more widely distributed across Britain, but loss of lowland heathland to agriculture and afforestation saw numbers decline. Jim Stewart, a forester on Cannock Chase, says numbers here are increasing again.
We come along and we've planned which trees we fell, and we do it in these relatively small coops, as we describe them. And when we've felled the trees and we've dealt with the residue, like the branches and that, it is just bare ground, which is exactly the start of what they like. Maybe for the first year they don't always come, but by the time the second year comes along, there's a bit of grass come through, the bracken started, we've planted some trees, then it's perfect.
With the net in place, Ben and I retreat to the edge of the cleared land and wait for darkness to fall and for the churring to begin. A thermal imaging camera helps Ben spot what the nightjars are up to.
So what you can hear now is the churring of the nightjar. And when they're churring, they tend to be perched on trees or branches. So we're just waiting for it just to get a little bit darker, and then hopefully the birds will come back to the net.
Ben is about to give up on catching any birds tonight, but as we walk towards the net, there's a surprise.
We found a nightjar that was in the bottom shelf of the net. It does occasionally happen where you turn up, and because it's in the bottom shelf, you can't quite see it with the thermal.
The captured nightjar turns out to be a fledgling chick. Ben carefully takes it in a cotton bag to his car for ringing.
So each bird species takes a different size ring, and on the ring we've got a unique reference number. And then what we do is we put that into the computer and submit it to the British Trust for Ornithology, and that data is stored there. And then if this bird is recovered in the future, either here or anywhere in the world, even if it's migrated back to Africa, we'll get a record of it.
I can see why they're hard to spot, because they look like the bark of a tree, don't they, the colour of them?
Yeah, I mean, the camouflage is just absolutely incredible.
The bird does look remarkably calm still, doesn't it? It's not struggling at all in your hands.
No, he's quite chilled out. He's probably just enjoying the rest, maybe.
Measurements and ringing completed, Ben takes the chick back and invites me to release it.
What we want you to do is literally, will fly, so I want you to release that hand in a minute.
The top hand?
Yeah, and just lift your left hand gently up.
So are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here goes.
There you go.
Brilliant, and there it goes.
There it goes.
Fantastic.
Well done, Bob.
As the British summer draws to a close, the nightjars start their epic journey back to Africa. But the work Ben and his team are doing will hopefully help to ensure there's enough habitat to give them a welcome return to the UK next year.
And that report was from Bob Hockenhull at Cannock Chase. Well, farming for nature was amongst the topics discussed at the inaugural Wild Summit this week, which took place in Bristol. Organised by Wildlife and Countryside Link, a coalition of nature organisations, the event saw more than 1,000 delegates from the worlds of business, politics, charity and policy gather together to discuss nature restoration at scale, including how farming could play its part. One of the sessions at the summit, Farming for the Future, looked at how nature-based approaches could help deliver climate targets. Charlotte Smith was at the summit for Farming Today and spoke to Vicky Hurd from the Wildlife Trusts and Andrew Clark from the National Farmers Union, who were panellists at the session, and she asked what Farming for the Future looked like for them.
Very much based on a nature-based approach, using nature to deliver all the things that we know it's well established that they can deliver.
So we're talking really there then about regenerative farming, using fewer things like pesticides or
fewer costly
herbicides.
Inputs. Free delivery of pest control by nature, the nutrient recycling. Nature does that best, and farmers know how to do that. They just need to be given the support, advice, training and demonstration to get on with it, and definitely get the policy in place to make sure they can do that.
Andrew, we've covered a lot on this programme, the problems with the environmental schemes being rolled out to farmers, and the fact that the largest of them is at the moment closed to new applications. Are farmers still up for it?
Well, I think lots of farmers will be up for it. I think, the serious point is that in December, 5,800 agreement holders in the longest lasting agri-environment schemes, HLS and Countryside Stewardship Scheme, they come to an end. And those farmers are sitting there looking at no security from basic payment scheme. That has gone. It is only the agri-environment schemes that are providing that cash flow, but also the environmental continuity on those farms. So many of these are in protected areas, national parks, upland areas, as well as the lowlands. And I think that is the real concern. The future of farming and the future of nature should be codependent, and they depend on making sure that we have an economic case for conservation.
Let's just talk about where we are. We're at the Wild Summit. It's the first. I think the plan is to have some more. What do these sorts of events achieve?
Well, I think they're a really good moment to make the case and to celebrate what is already being done. Because as Andrew's saying, a lot of farmers have been doing amazing work. We've had progress, but the setbacks are really hard, and I will say that this afternoon, but this summit is exciting. The amount of people here, a lot of young people here, excited about what we know we should and can do for nature.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you, Vicky. I mean, I think you and I have been working together on the environment and farming agenda for a very long period of time. I think the critical point I think I've learned over the time doing that is it's really important that nature people don't just talk to nature people.
Yes, absolutely.
And farming people don't, you know, we need that collective endeavour. And I think one of the points that was interesting came out in the panel session just now was that we do see a fractured government and a fractured policy and a fractured regulatory regime. And that is one of the critical problems that we've got.
That's Andrew Clark and Vicky Hurd. Back in 2020, the UK government pledged to protect 30% of land and sea for nature by 2030. And to coincide with the event, Wildlife and Countryside Link published a report into the progress being made towards meeting this target. Their research suggests that the UK is on track to miss it by quite a long way, with only around 6% of UK land effectively conserved and managed for nature. That's just 1/5 of the way towards that target. In England, they say, the percentage of land protected for nature and in good condition is just 2.83%. Tony Juniper is chair of Natural England, and Charlotte spoke to him about the report and whether he thought that the target still could be met.
Those numbers, there's discussions going on depending on what you feel is adequately protected and good for nature. That's not the real point. The real point is how we're going to close this 20+% gap, which lies between here and 2030. And it's absolutely huge.
And it's only 5 years.
And it's 5 years, it's half a decade. And so we're going to really have to get our skates on and really put some ambition and some heft behind this.
But we've been saying that for years and years and years.
Not that many years.
What has to change?
This target was only adopted in 2022. It's about fundamental ecological principles and how we are going to blend nature into our infrastructure, into agriculture, into our built environments, as well as the protected areas. It's going to be bringing lots of different sectors in.
And isn't this partly where the problem is? Because we've had a lot of discussion today about the financial pressure that, for instance, the government's environmental schemes aimed at farmers here in England are currently under. And you can't draw people in to manage land for the environment if you're not paying them to do it.
So there is a big question about money, and one of the things I think we need to look at much harder is how we integrate different budgets across society to be pointing towards nature recovery.
So private money rather than taxpayers' money?
Both. And so, for example, we are going to spend some billions of pounds over this next 5 years trying to reduce flood risk. Can we spend more of that on nature-based solutions? So there's money there if we can repurpose it.
We were hearing from the Wildlife Trusts and the NFU earlier. They were actually agreeing that at the moment we have a fractured policy and a fractured regulatory regime. Is that fair?
So there is a better future for this if we can think about ways of getting beyond the details and into that bigger picture. But we are trapped at the moment in a regime which was created to keep the status quo, to conserve the environment. What we now need to do, and 30 by 30 is emblematic of this, we now have to focus on nature recovery. And the old tools that we've used for 7 decades aren't really geared up for that.
So are we going to meet this 30 by 30 target realistically?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, and I'll keep trying to do it until we get to the end of 2030. But it's a big hill, and it's a steep hill.
That's Chair of Natural England, Tony Juniper there. And you can hear more from the Wild Summit in Friday's edition of Farming Today, available to listen to now on BBC Sounds. And it's been a week of change at DEFRA. After Keir Starmer's cabinet reshuffle, it is so long and farewell to former Secretary of State Steve Reed and Farming Minister Daniel Zeichner. And a cautious industry welcome to 2 new faces. Angela Eagle in that Farming Minister role, and Emma Reynolds, fresh from the Treasury, takes over as Secretary of State. So is there potential here for a reset between the government and industry? President of the National Farmers Union, Tom Bradshaw, met with the new Secretary of State and told Anna Hill that he believes that Emma Reynolds comes in with an opportunity.
I hope that confidence has hit rock bottom and isn't going to get any worse. And now we have to jointly work together to say, right, how do we rebuild the confidence of the industry? How do we unlock the potential to deliver the food production that this country needs? And how can we make sure that right the way across government, food and farming is prioritised with the policies that will unlock the opportunities to invest for the future?
She's been around the Treasury a lot, hasn't she, Emma Reynolds? Does that help with some of the things that you want to talk about, like budgets and inheritance tax and funding for things like the sustainable farming incentive?
I think having that economic background is something that if DEFRA becomes a fully functioning economic department, it can only help us to put the economic case forward for the investment which is needed. We had a good conversation about how we drive the investment in infrastructure. There may be an opportunity there to try and unlock some of the policies that we need moving forwards at a time where we know to build the resilience of the food industry in the face of a changing climate, we need to invest huge amounts over the next decade.
NFU President Tom Bradshaw. The Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or DEFRA Committee, warned this week that illegal meat imports are at crisis levels, risking a major animal disease outbreak. MPs said that authorities tackling this wave of illegal produce find themselves without the necessary leadership, intelligence and resources to do so. Alistair Carmichael, the Lib Dem MP for Shetland and Orkney, chairs the DEFRA Committee, and Charlotte Smith asked him what evidence there is to suggest that illegal meat imports are increasing.
We have seen it with our own eyes. We went down to the port of Dover, and it is a pretty horrific story, let me tell you. The sheer volumes that are coming through the port of Dover in particular, but doubtless also through other ports around the country, at a time when you have foot and mouth disease and African swine fever on continental Europe, creates really what here is the perfect storm for what could be a catastrophically bad outcome for British agriculture. And the really scary thing is nobody seems to be prepared to step up to the plate and take control and do something about this.
We have covered here on Farming Today some of the concerns of port staff. We also reported on some of the evidence you heard and what you found on your visit. Were you surprised by what you saw?
We were obviously going to see what was happening in Dover for a reason, so we weren't going completely cold. We saw white vans of different sizes being opened up. We saw pretty roughly butchered meat, some of which was coming for the food supply market, others of which would have been perhaps headed to specific communities. One of the real frustrations of this work has been the difficulty actually in quantifying the scale of what we're dealing with here. We know that it's big because we hear that from people like the Dover Port Health Authority and indeed from their colleagues in Border Force. But because there is no strategic approach to this, we know it's bad, we just don't know how bad.
Well, that's the point here, isn't it? There isn't any good data available. You say illegal meat imports are increasing, but how do you know that they're at the crisis levels you describe without reliable data?
Well, we rely on what we hear from the people who are doing whatever work is being done there. And, I keep coming back to Dover Port Health Authority because that was the visit that we did. The extent to which the people who are charged with this front line of the nation's biosecurity, the circumstances in which they are being expected to work are truly disgraceful.
DEFRA says intelligence-led checks are being carried out. It talks about robust biosecurity controls which were implemented at pace following confirmation of the foot and mouth outbreak in Germany. Why are you not convinced by those reassurances?
Well, we've looked at what they call intelligence-led, and I'm afraid the conclusion that we have come to is that that intelligence is incomplete. There are too many players on the field here with nobody taking responsibility. DEFRA, as the department which is responsible for the biosecurity of this country, should be the people to hold the ring, and they should be the people to set up a task force, we say, call it what you will, bring everybody together, get systematic analysis of what's coming in and where and in what quantity, and then move to stop it. You get a lot of confiscation, but where you see evidence of large-scale imports, there really ought to be more than confiscation. There needs to be prosecution. That's going to be the only thing, I think, that will turn this around.
The chair of the House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, Alistair Carmichael. In response, DEFRA told us this government has significantly increased seizures of illegal meat, restricted the import of dangerous animal products and is investing over £200 million in a new biosecurity centre. We will consider the recommendations of the committee as we continue to work closely with port operators, industry, trade partners and border force to protect our food security, farmers and economy. And that's it from us for today. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Sarah Swadling, and Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.